All right. It is 2 o'clock, so I want to go ahead and welcome everyone to the awesome Avians Educator webinar. This is the fourth in a series of Wildlife Wednesday webinars the Arizona Game and Fish Department has been hosting with the intent of kind of getting educators up to speed and kind of get some cool information about different animals in general, and then with an Arizona focus, and then also giving you some ideas for some activities that you can bring into the classroom. Let me just do some general housekeeping. Many of you have been on my webinars before, so you understand this, but for those of you that are new, you should know that the microphones will be muted throughout the presentation, so you won't be able to speak with me directly. It just gets too confusing, and if people don't turn off microphones and all that stuff. However, you will be able to interact with me through the chat or the Q&A boxes. You can do either one. There should be a control panel on your screen for those of you that are viewing on a computer. That there should be like a chat bubble that you can click on, and then you can put chat to all the participants or to me, or there's a Q&A box. It just says Q&A. You click on that. Either one will work. It does not matter. I am monitoring both boxes. So you can put comments, questions, whatever it might be, into any of either of those boxes, and I will be answering questions throughout the presentation, and then I will be doing a big bulk of them at the end, depending on when the questions come in. Before I go on the rest of this housekeeping, let's test out your chat feature just a little bit, make sure everyone understands. If you can just tell me in the chat box or in the Q&A box where you are listening to this webinar from right now. So what city are you in right now as you're doing this webinar? And while you're putting that in, I'm going to go ahead and just talk about the other pieces here. This presentation is being recorded, so if for some reason there is technical difficulties, you get logged out or anything like that, there's going to be an opportunity for you to be able to see it later, or you have to leave a little bit early. At the end of the presentation, there should be a pop-up survey that comes to you. As soon as you click out of the room or out of the box, the survey should come. I do understand that for many people it doesn't happen. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that it is a pop-up, and so if you have a pop-up blocker on, it may not work. If you don't get the survey, that's fine. Don't worry about it. You don't need to reach out to me. But if you do get the survey, if it does pop up, I would just ask that you fill it out. It should take like a minute to just answer a couple questions. It gives us some feedback on what we can use, how we can improve these in the future. And then about an hour or so after this presentation is finished, you will get a follow-up email. And in that email will be 2 links. The first link will provide a link to your PDF, a PDF of your certificate. So for those of you that are educators that need continuing education credit, there will be a certificate for 1 hour of continuing education. All you got to do is print it out, put your name on it, you're good to go. The other link that will be in that email is for resources. So everything that we talk about today, you're going to get a link to bird resources that we're providing. So all the lessons and activities that we talk about, there's going to be information on those, plus a wealth of information that we don't talk about today will be included in those resources. So it's just going to be a link to a website that we've collated and culminated a number of bird resources for you. So you're going to have all that in there. So just looking at the chat box, it looks like most people are getting this to work correctly. We've got representatives from all over Arizona, looks like Flagstaff, Happy Jack, Mesa, Glendale, El Mirage, Chino Valley, Tempe, Tucson, Phoenix, Sun City, Cave Creek, Tucson, Tolleson. So a whole bunch are coming through here, and I appreciate that. Thank you for doing that. So whatever you did for your chat or your Q&A, that's how you can communicate with me as we go through the presentation. Let's do some introductions. This webinar is being hosted by the Arizona Game and Fish Department. If you are not familiar with who we are the state government agency that is responsible for managing all of Arizona's wildlife population. So that's more than 800 species of wildlife that are found throughout the state of Arizona. We make sure that those populations are doing okay today and into the future for future generations to enjoy. We are not your typical government agency in that we are not funded through general tax dollars. So there's nothing from your sales tax, nothing from your income tax that comes to us. Instead, we operate on what we call a user pay model. So it is the users of the resource that are the ones that pay for it. So that's where things like hunting and fishing licenses come in. When you buy a hunting or fishing license, that money comes directly back to the department for on-the-ground wildlife management. My name is Eric Proctor. I am the Wildlife Education Coordinator for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. I've been in that position for about 15 years. In that position, I like to tell people that I kind of work behind the scenes. So I work with you guys as educators. So you won't see me coming into the classrooms very often and giving presentations. Not that anybody's going into the classrooms right now because of, 1, it's summer, and 2, because of the coronavirus. But I typically don't give classroom presentations. I do on occasion, but not a lot. Mostly what I do is provide support for you as educators. So I'm doing curriculum development, resource development, professional development to help you bring wildlife issues and concepts into your classroom or whatever your teaching situation might be. As I said, I've been in this position for about 15 years. Prior to that, I was a middle school science teacher, so I taught 7th grade science in both the Littleton School District in Avondale and the Kyrene School District over in Chandler. I've also been involved in a lot of other science education. I've worked at the Phoenix Zoo as an outreach coordinator. I've done work at the Arizona Sonoran Desert Museum. I've worked for the Challenger Space Center. So all told, I've been involved in science education for well over 20 years. So enough with the introductions. It's time to discuss birds. So some of this information might be new to some of you. It might not be new to you. Hopefully I put it together in an interesting fashion that might give you some more information and some ideas. A lot of this information is not my own. I took it from various sources. National Geographic is cited quite often. You're going to see that I get some data from some other organizations. I culminate it together into what I think is a logical presentation that you'll get out of. But let's discuss these. So birds are vertebrate animals adapted for flight, but that isn't their only form of locomotion. Many can also run, jump, swim, or dive. Some, like penguins, have lost the ability to fly, but retained their wings. Birds are found worldwide and in all habitats. The largest is the 9-foot-tall ostrich, and the smallest is the 2-inch-long bee hummingbird. Everything about the anatomy of a bird reflects its ability to fly. Let's first take a look at something unique to birds, the feathers. This image, as well as the content I'm going to share over the next minute or so, comes from a great local website that I encourage everyone to check out. It is called Ask a Biologist. You can see the website right there on the feather image. While it started as a great way for kids to reach out to real-world scientists at ASU, it has expanded into a collection of kid-friendly articles and activities. Looking at the image, you will see that feathers come in many shapes and sizes. The types we see the most often are the tail and flight feathers, also called veined or contour feathers. At first look, they may seem the same, but actually are different. Tail feathers are balanced to the left and to the right of center, so they're almost symmetrical. Tail feathers help the birds steer, and so that symmetry helps with that. Flight feathers, on the other hand, have a wider and narrower side. This makes them better for flying because they can cut through the air with very little resistance. So you can see on that image that the left side is much more narrower than the right side on the flight feather. This unequal helps them reduce drag. But those aren't the only types of feathers. The downy feathers provide warmth and insulation. These are the same feathers that we often make jackets or blankets from for that very same reason. The semi-plume feathers also help to keep birds warm, and they help water birds float. The bristle feathers are found around the eyes, nostrils, and/or mouths of some birds. They are believed to serve a sensory function and may actually help some insect-eating birds catch their prey. Phyloplume feathers can be found around the tail and flight feathers. They also serve a sensory function and may help the bird fly more efficiently and also tell the bird when its feathers need to be maintained. Owls have some really cool feathers, not seen in other species of birds. Since most owls are nocturnal, their feathers have unique adaptations that help them fly silently. Specifically, the leading edge of their flight feathers have comb-like extensions, and the trailing edge is fringed. You can see that in this image provided by the Audubon Society. When you look at that, the front end of their flight feathers, they have that comb-like structure, and on the back ends are much more fringed. Both of these adaptations allow the wing to cut through the air with minimal noise. So this is a large part of what the silent flight of owls can be credited to, is their feather design and how these feathers are set up so that you don't hear them. The wings of birds are also incredibly well adapted. They're shaped to create lift. The leading edge is thicker than the back edge. The bones and muscles of the wing are also highly specialized. In this image, you can see how the wing bones compare to those of humans and bats, another animal that has mastered flight. In this illustration, you can see that the wings of birds and bats are actually very different, even though they are supported by the same bones. For bats, it is the finger bones that make up the wing. For birds, however, it is the entire arm. The bones of birds are also hollow instead of solid like mammals. This makes them lighter and better for flying. Airplane wings are often modeled after bird wings, as you can see kind of in the image on the left. Since this webinar is designed for educators, we want to make sure that we focus on the instructional side as well. So at times throughout this presentation, I will pause from the main content delivery and provide you with activity ideas that you could possibly bring back to your teaching situation. Our first one of these activities looks at a concept of biomimicry, or the idea that engineers often look to see how nature solves a particular problem and see if we might be able to implement similar strategies. Airplane wing design is an example of biomimicry. In fact, you can see a screenshot of an article from Airbus, one of the largest aircraft manufacturers, which highlights the role of biomimicry in airplane design. So we are looking at how other animals fly, and also in this, they're also looking at sharks and how the streamlining of sharks, how that may help us make more fuel efficient aircraft. In this activity, students will first look at birds to see how they fly and what their wings look like. Then they will be introduced to some different airplanes. They have to match the purpose of the airplane with the bird that was potentially used as a model. Let's take a brief look at an example. So here are 3 birds that are found in Arizona. You can read their brief description, but I'll discuss them as well. So on the left-hand side, you have a Cooper's hawk, which is often found in forested areas and hunts birds. So Cooper's hawks actually hunt birds in air. It has short wings for maneuvering through the trees. So rather than some of these other birds that you'll see, its wings are very short. This allows it to be able to turn a lot faster to maneuver through those trees as it's chasing down birds. The peregrine falcon is thought to be the world's largest or fastest animal, not largest. It has the potential to reach speeds of up to 200 miles per hour. Its wings are shaped very differently. They have short triangular shaped wings. So they look like a flying missile as they're reaching their speeds of 200 miles an hour. And on the right-hand side, you see a turkey vulture. Turkey vultures are known for soaring high above the land in search of their food source, which is carrion or dead animals. They have really long wings. The long wings allow them to get more lift, which allows them to soar without expending as much energy. So what I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to show you 3 aircraft. And all I want you to do is look at the aircraft and what their purpose might have been, and then figure out which of these birds might have served as a model for each of those particular aircraft. And then Alyssa asked, may I have a copy of this presentation, please? Absolutely. The presentation may be included in the educational materials, that the link at the end. If it's not, just go ahead and send me an email and I will send you a version of this presentation. It's somewhat large because of the photos that are in there, but I do have a way to scale it down a little bit so that I can give you a version that's suitable for you. I put it into a PDF version that you can still show on a screen, but I can absolutely get you a copy of that presentation. So you've seen these 3 birds. So here are 3 aircraft. On the left-hand side, you have the B-29, was a large airplane that was used as a bomber in World War II. It could remain in the air for hours and fly about 5,000 miles in one stretch. The P-51 Mustang, which you see in the middle, was used in World War II also. It was designed to be fast and maneuverable in order to protect those bombers from other airplanes. So it was a dogfighting airplane designed to take out other aircraft in air. And then you have the SR-71 Blackbird, which is on the right-hand side. It's one of the fastest airplanes that's ever created. It broke records by flying from California to Virginia in about 68 minutes and from New York to London in less than 2 hours. Based on the information I've just given you, which of these birds, and here I'll show you the birds again, which of these 3 birds served as a good model for each of these aircraft? Go ahead and write your thoughts in the chat or in the Q&A, and let's see how you guys do. Which of these birds, the Cooper's hawk, which was maneuverable and could fly through forests and hunting birds, the peregrine falcon, which is largely thought to be the world's fastest animal, or the turkey vulture, which could soar for extended periods of time? Which of these animals could be considered a model for these aircraft? Got a couple answers coming in. And while you're putting in some answers, let me just tell you, so for your students, obviously, you could give them information about the birds. They could research the birds a little bit, and then you would give them the aircraft, and their job is to match them up a little bit. And there are more aircraft you can use. We also, in this activity, include helicopters, and so they can compare that to hummingbirds and some other stuff. All right, so you guys have come up with a lot of different answers. I see Cooper's hawk is coming a lot up for B. A lot are saying the peregrine falcon might be there for C, the SR-71 blackbird. Some are saying the turkey vulture and the B-29 bomber might be the same. Let's take a look at our answers here. And so you can see absolutely correct that the Cooper's hawk, which is a maneuverable bird, has these short wings that are designed to fly through forests and fly through that, chasing other birds. Well, that's exactly what the P-51 Mustang does. The P-51 is a dogfighting aircraft that's designed to take out other aircraft in air. So it has much shorter wings, especially if you compare that to like the B-29 bomber that's sitting next to it. Speaking of the B-29 bomber, the turkey vulture could largely be considered a model for the B-29 bomber. Both have very long, stretched out wings that allow them to maintain lift without expending as much energy. So those long wings can help make them more fuel efficient, so they can fly for longer times on those long bombing runs. That of course leaves or C, which is not the P-51, the SR-71, which is one of the world's fastest aircraft. Ties in with the world's fastest animal. And in this case, they both have that triangular shaped wing, which helps them with lower the resistance and fly at faster speeds. So good job. There is a lot more that can go into this activity. I have actually done some stuff. I didn't go into all the detail, but some stuff on the Wright brothers. If you follow the Wright brothers journals, when they were trying to develop powered flight, a lot of time watching turkey vultures and vultures to get an idea of how they change direction, how they use their wings. So this idea of biomimicry and airplane design is a very, very consistent idea. So if you're looking at incorporating some engineering ideas into your activities, this is a good one to get started and still keep the wildlife flair. You could expand on this then by looking at having the kids build paper airplanes based on certain needs that you want. You want the paper airplane to stay in the air for as long as possible. What is that going to look like? You want the paper airplane to cut through the air and fly as far as possible. What might that look like? So there's different types of things you can do. Good. So birds often use these wings to engage in migration. There are some misconceptions about migration, however. Specifically, students tend to believe that migration is triggered by weather. What do we normally say? Birds fly south for the winter. This is true, but only to a certain extent. It really isn't the weather that's triggering them as much as it, which I think is implied in that statement. Usually migration is triggered by some other factors, often of which is resource availability. Specifically food and nesting locations. If their food is gone, they have to go to new places to get their food. Birds that nest in the northern hemisphere tend to migrate northward in the spring to take advantage of burgeoning insect populations, budding plants, and an abundance of nesting locations. As winter approaches and the availability of insects and other food drop, the birds move south again. Escaping the cold is a motivating factor, but many species, including hummingbirds, can withstand freezing temperatures as long as an adequate supply of food is available. Here you see plenty of images of birds and evidence of birds that can live in the snow. So it's not that there's snow or that it's cold temperatures that are triggering them. The colder snow temperatures may be triggering the food to move on, which then moves them. It's really the food or the resource availability that's pushing the birds on. In general, we find that birds that migrate long distances tend to follow certain flyways. You can consider these sort of bird highways, and they tend to run north-south along major topographical features, like mountain ranges. North America has 4 sort of recognized major flyways that you can see here. These are the paths that different bird species tend to take. Arizona tends to fall along the extreme eastern edge of the Pacific Flyway that you can see right there, which runs sort of along the Rocky Mountains. Of course, long migrations present many problems for the birds who engage in them. Obviously, migrations take a tremendous amount of energy, so the birds need to be able to either stock up on food prior to beginning the migration, or be certain of finding plenty of adequate food along the route so that they can translate that into energy. There is also a chance of bad weather that could put a tragic end to the migration, or it could result in birds being blown off course, like you see here. This is a picture of a pelican that was taken in Arizona. Pelicans aren't supposed to be here, but every now and then, as you can see from the news articles that are at the bottom of the screen, it is somewhat common occurrence. So we do get this every now and then as pelicans sort of get blown off course somehow, and they end up in Arizona. And of course, birds have to deal with potential human conflicts. like habitat destruction or poisoning. From a wildlife management perspective, bird migrations are a prime example of why states and countries often need to work together for the conservation of species. Wildlife do not recognize borders. Laws protecting the summering habitats of certain birds won't be as effective if similar protections are not put on their wintering grounds or even along the areas along the migration route that the birds may need to stop at. Geographically, Arizona is a unique spot. We're at the intersection of North America's four major deserts. We have most of the world's terrestrial biotic communities, and we have the transition zones between all of those habitats. As such, we have tremendous diversity in plants, which then results in tremendous wildlife diversity. Some birds migrate to Arizona, and some migrate from Arizona. As you can see in this thing here, this is just a small snapshot of some of the birds that call Arizona home at least part of the year. You can see some are summer residents, some are winter residents, and some don't reside here, but they pass through on that flyway that we talked about. You can also see that we have some rather extreme migrations that occur in Arizona. These are just three examples that I pulled out on the graph, the map on the right-hand side. The sandhill crane is listed in blue. Now, we get sandhill cranes here in southern Arizona down kind of starting in November, December, and they're here through February, March timeframe because we are their sort of wintering grounds. And then at the end of winter, they move and go back towards Alaska, Siberia, the Yukon, those types of areas. And then they come back in. So in the summer, they spend up there, and then the winter, they come down here. It's actually really fascinating that we get 30,000 or so of these sandhill cranes that come into southeastern Arizona. Another example you can see is the rufous hummingbird, which is showed there in red. Hummingbird is this tiny little bird, but actually has a really extensive migration. This is just one example of coming down from southern Alaska all the way through, passes through Arizona, and then comes down to Mexico. And then the Swainson's hawk. We often get the excuse me, the Swainson's. Excuse me. Give me just a moment. Sorry. Thank you for your concern as the people writing in. I just had something go down my throat, and then I had to stop and get some water to take care of it. My apologies. Anyway, the Swainson's hawk starts here in Arizona and could fly all the way down into South America. Argentina has a very extensive migration route. Ricky mentions that Roosevelt gets the white pelicans that are headed to Mexico as well. Absolutely. So this is just an example of some of our Arizona migrants that come through, just a small sampling of the diversity that we have in Arizona as far as birds. Migration is such an important topic that I actually have a few activities to share with you. The first is a general look at migratory birds in Arizona, kind of looking at that sandhill crane and the rufous hummingbird that we did before. In this case, you can create these. This was designed to be with the large North American map that is sometimes available, the floor size one that you can put in a gymnasium. But if you don't have access to that, National Geographic used to have those, and you can still find them every now and then. I believe the Arizona Geographic Alliance has some of these large maps. But anyway, if you don't have access to that, we also section of a map is on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and you can put them out. It's really nice to just see them on these big maps, and you can put that on the floor or some of that. But even if that doesn't work, you can use a smaller map. But the idea of this activity is that students are given specific birds to look at, and they're going to map the winter and the summer locations of those birds, and then they're going to compare the migrations. They're going to answer some questions, and just give you an example. Here's two examples, the sandhill crane and the rufous hummingbird, which we've already talked about. The kids are given a little bit of a descriptive card that they're given out, and then they're given these tokens. One, the yellow token is they're going to place that on the map at the summering home of the sandhill crane, and then the blue one they're going to place at the wintering home of the sandhill crane. And once they do that, then they can chart the course. What's the most likely course that these animals are going to follow, understanding that most birds don't fly over large bodies of water, so they stick to land as much as possible. It's not always true, but in general, they tend to float over land. So looking at the topography of the area, what is their route going to look like? And they can compare that to other birds. This also addresses some other misconceptions. A lot of kids think that the larger the bird, the larger the migration. That's not always the case. The rufous hummingbird is a prime example of that. The rufous hummingbird has one of the most extensive migrations out there, but it's a really small bird. So by doing this activity and showing these different animals their migration paths, you can do that. So you do the same thing with the rufous hummingbird, and there's like 20 other birds or so that we have in here. What's cool about it is if you do this on the really large maps, the floor size maps or whatever, or you use yarn to map out the migration paths, then you can lay each of those stretched out yarn pieces next to each other, and you can create a graph of migration lengths based on that information. So this is an activity that's available to you. Another one that is available to you, which is actually a digital activity. It's one of our new set of digital activities we created. So in light of the shutdowns of schools and the increase in home-based learning, we decided to move a lot of our learning to digital. We've been doing a lot more webinars like these, but we've also done some student stuff. So in this case, we have these interactive Google Forms that kids can create. Not that they create, that they complete. And so this one is on migration. So you can see just as like the first page of the migration one, so that they would read this information about the birds, and then they would have to answer some questions based on this information. And when they hit next, if they're correct, they move on to the next thing. If they're incorrect, it takes them back and tells them, good try, here's something to think about, and so on. And so it's a digital activity that you'll have access to in the resources that are at the end. So let's talk a little bit about avian evolution. Few subjects in evolutionary theory have posed such intriguing puzzles for so long as the origin of birds. Evidence of avian beginnings has been elusive in the fossil record because of birds' light, hollow bones that rapidly decompose. The hunt for the ancestors of living birds began with a specimen of Archaeopteryx, which you can see on the left-hand side there. This is the first, what is considered the first known bird. It was discovered in the early 1860s. Archaeopteryx itself was believed to have lived about 150 million years ago. Like birds, it had feathers along its arms and tail, but unlike living birds, it also had teeth and a long bony tail. Furthermore, many of the bones in Archaeopteryx's hands, shoulder girdles, pelvis, and feet were distinct. They weren't fused and reduced as they are in living birds. Because of these characteristics, Archaeopteryx was recognized as an intermediate between birds and reptiles. But which reptiles? In the 1970s, paleontologists noticed that Archaeopteryx shared unique features with small carnivorous dinosaurs called theropods. Based on their shared features, scientists reasoned that perhaps the theropods were the ancestors of birds. When paleontologists built evolutionary trees to study the question, they were even more convinced. The birds are simply a twig on the dinosaur's branch of the tree of life. As birds evolved from these theropod dinosaurs, many of their features were modified. However, it's important to remember that the animals were not trying to become birds in any sense. In fact, the more closely we look, the more obvious it is that the suite of features that characterize birds evolved through a complex series of steps and serve different functions along the way. Take feathers, for example. Small theropods related to Compsognathus probably evolved the first feathers, although recent discoveries show fuzz on pterosaurs, which may be a type of proto-feather. These short hair-like feathers grew on the compy's heads, necks, and bodies and provided insulation, much like some of our current feathers. The bony tail of some of the dinosaurs was reduced to a stump, and a spray of feathers at the tail eventually took on the function of improving stability and maneuverability. The wishbone, which was present in non-bird dinosaurs, became stronger and more elaborate. The breastbone became larger and evolved a central keel along the midline of the breast, which served to anchor the flight muscles. The arms evolved to be longer than the legs as the main form of locomotion switched from running to flight, and teeth were lost repeatedly in various lineages of early birds. Recent research seems to indicate that there was not some great evolutionary leap from non-birds to birds. Instead, there was a pretty steady continuum of various characteristics that developed independently over millions of years. But once the basic bird body had evolved, then diversification happened very fast. And diversify they did. This graphic, which I thought was really cool, but it's really, really complex. I'm not going to talk about all aspects of it. There's a whole research paper that you can look at this, where this came from. It was developed by researchers from the University of Sheffield, Yale University, University of Tasmania, and Simon Fraser University. It is considered to be the first family tree of all living birds. The circle shows time to give an idea of the rate of diversification. The center of the circle is farther back in time. So as you get more towards the center, you're going back in time. The edge of the circle is the species alive today. So you can see how many branches start appearing as you get more towards the outside of the circle. So notice how fast you start, it starts slowly, and then once that bird body starts to develop, the diversification happens really fast. You start seeing branches that start happening and happening and happening and happening. Also, the colors represent diversification rate. So warmer colors, reds, yellows, oranges, show groups of birds that are evolving the fastest. So if you look in that lower right-hand side of the circle, you can sort of see a lot of diversification happening among those types of species. As like I said, this came from a research article called "The Global Diversity of Birds in Space and Time." That was published in Nature just a few years ago. So that graphic was cool and all, but as I mentioned, it was very, very complex. I was interested in diving into the data a little more, trying to simplify it. So I found some freely available data on bird diversity and created some of my own graphs. This data comes from the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or what we call the IUCN, an organization that is devoted to understanding the status of nature and how to conserve it. In this case, it breaks the birds down by their orders. So these are all birds, but these are different types of birds under that avian group. The pie chart shows which bird orders have the most species. I don't have enough time to go through all of the orders, so I thought I would focus on the orders that have the most species, and maybe some of the orders that have the least species, so you can get an idea of some of the diversity. The order with the most, and you can see that, that's that big brown section that takes up almost 60% of the pie. This is the passerines. And with a whopping 60% of all birds, it isn't even close. So the next closest order only has 5% of bird species. The passerines, which we describe as the perching or the songbirds, take up 60% of all bird diversity. They are often distinguished by the arrangement of their toes, typically 3 toes pointing forward and 1 pointing backward, which assists with perching. As I mentioned, after that, there is a sharp drop-off. The Capromulgiforms, or the nightjars, are the next most diverse, with about 5.5% of all bird species. Then orders containing woodpeckers, parrots, gulls, and doves round out the top, each of those containing about 3 to 4% of all bird species. By contrast, there are 2 bird orders that only have a single bird species. The cuckoo roller makes up I'm gonna butcher these bird names, I'm sorry, that makes up the Leptosomiforms. It is an insect-eating bird only found in Madagascar and the Comoro Islands. And the Hoatzin is the only living representative of the Opisthlocomiform orders. It is found only in South America. So these 2 orders only have 1 species each. The IUCN is largely known for tracking data related to the status of species around the world. They group animals based on how vulnerable the population is to extinction. When I graphed the bird orders based on the percent of their species that were considered vulnerable, and in this case, we consider vulnerable to be the top 3 categories that IUCN lists. So these are birds that they describe as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. So these are the top 3 categories of birds as far as their danger of becoming extinct. I'm going to describe them all together as vulnerable. This is what I found. There are 6 orders that have at least 30% of their species considered vulnerable. 30% or more of their species are considered vulnerable. These orders consist of a wide variety of birds that include hornbills, bustards, flamingo, storks, ibises, albatrosses, penguins. Perhaps not surprisingly, because of what we know about the oceans and what's happening with our waters, many of these birds seem to be closely associated with water. When you think about penguins, flamingos, storks, ibises, albatrosses, those are some of the most endangered orders of birds. Some of these orders have a very small number of species, which may also distort the data a little bit. For example, the Europigiforms only have 2 species. The species is called the kagu, and the Mesothrornithiforms only have 3 species of flightless birds that are endemic to Madagascar. So while some of these have a large, there's one of these that has 30 species, I think one that has over 100 species that are in it, and they have 30% of their species that are in danger. The middle one there, the one that's at 100%, well, there's only 3 species in that entire order. So all of them are vulnerable. And so, of course, they have 100%. Despite this incredible diversity, it hasn't always been great news for birds. Here are some early accounts of the passenger pigeon. You can read these. These came from journal entries from the early 17th and 18th centuries. They're a classic example of what we consider to be an inexhaustible resource. The populations of passenger pigeons were so numerous that people believed there was no way that we could possibly impact them. You can see there, Ralph Hamor in 1615 wrote that wild pigeons, in this case he was talking about passenger pigeons, would fly above him for 3 or 4 hours at a time, so thick that they shadowed the sky. Thomas Macon in 1729 wrote that they're so numerous that they darken the sky. That was what the accounts of passenger pigeons were in the 16 and 1700s. This was an account of the passenger pigeon at the beginning of the 20th century. You can see in 1907. Notice the marked change. I'm not going to read this whole thing. I don't necessarily expect you to read. I know it's a lot of text that shouldn't be on a slide like this, but I wanted to get the whole quote into there. But you can see some distinct notices in here. The clouds of wild pigeons arriving at certain seasons in incredible numbers were killed by the tens of thousands, and for many weeks furnished an additional dish for the planter's table. Was far beyond the power of human calculation. So thickly did they crowd the woods in different places, and so tame had they become, they would literally the weight of these birds on the trees would bend the branches. This was in 1907. 7 years later, the last known passenger pigeon, named Martha, would die in the Cincinnati Zoo. So in 1914, the last passenger pigeon died from darkening the skies for hours to being gone forever. That was the unfortunate fate of the passenger pigeon in America. Even though we never really had passenger pigeons in Arizona, there are important lessons we can learn from these now extinct birds. As such, we have created a reading activity that can be implemented in your classroom or home. And this actually is wrong. I haven't finished the slide. But in this case, your students are given 2 essays by famous biologists. These were actually speeches. They're essays. They're essay versions of the speeches that these biologists gave. The one was written by Aldo Leopold, and at the time there was a monument that a state gave to the passenger pigeon, right? And it was the first of its kind. We had never really memorialized an extinct animal before. And so this was the first time we'd put a memorial for a passenger pigeon up because they were extinct. And so Aldo Leopold, who was a famous biologist, he's considered the father of wildlife biology, created the science of wildlife biology. He spoke at that memorial. And then I believe 50 years later, another biologist was speaking on the anniversary of that. And I include both speeches for your students to compare and contrast, and they can do things. So here's some examples. The first one on the left is on a monument to a pigeon, and so it talks about, this is the first page of that article. This is the actual picture of the monument and the dedication he was doing. And then the one over here is Dr. Stanley Temple, who was actually in Aldo Leopold's position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Is doing a rededication speech. And so the kids have the opportunity to compare the speeches. What I do is include some reading stuff in here so they can compare the tone, the mood, and the theme of the different essays. So there's all different types of stuff. They answer some questions and things like that. So this is a great way for you to incorporate some reading into your languages, into your science instruction as well. So that's going to be available to you. on the website at the end. So let's talk about, it isn't all bad news either. We have learned lessons from the extinction of not only the passenger pigeon, but the Carolina parakeet and the great auk. We have been able to implement wildlife management strategies that are making a noted difference in bird populations. The bald eagle is just one example. Bald eagles are old birds. Of a bald eagle have been identified in a Colorado cave dating back 670,000 to 780,000 years ago. In Arizona, where the records are a little bit more sparse because we're relatively new as far as discovering go and exploration goes. We have records of bald eagles nesting at Stoneman Lake going back to the 1890s. Prior to European settlement, it was estimated that there could have been as many as 500,000 bald eagles across North America. Then, following trends that we observed with the passenger pigeon, we started to see a decline in bald eagle populations in the middle 1800s. This was a result of a number of causes over the next few decades, including a reduction in prey base due to declining numbers of waterfowl and bison and the illegal collecting of feathers. Then in the 1940s, the increased use of DDT as a pest control method was almost the final blow. An active chemical pesticide impairs the normal calcification of eggs, making reproduction difficult. Basically, the birds sit on these non-calcified eggs. They don't have the eggshell to protect them, and they crush the babies, makes reproduction very, very difficult. The bald eagle was nearly extinct and was placed on the endangered species list. In 1978, when the species was listed as endangered under the Species Act, Arizona only had 11 known breeding areas. You can see that here on the graph. On the left-hand side is the number of breeding areas, and then on the right-hand side is years. You can sort of see them. The arrow is when the first arrow where it says listed is when the bald eagle was listed as an endangered species. We had 11 known breeding areas in the state of Arizona. Most of those were in easy accessible locations along the Salt and the Verde rivers. The department, we began our annual nest surveys in 1985, utilizing helicopters to assess the remote canyons of Arizona's watersheds. As a result of a biological opinion in 1987, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation funded a multi-million-dollar project to study the ecology of eagles in Arizona. Due to the efforts of this study and the nest surveys that we have been doing, as well as a number of other specific management actions we've been doing towards bald eagles, Arizona had documented 36 breeding areas when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service downlisted the species from endangered to threatened in 1995 across all recovery regions. By the time the bald eagle was completely removed from the endangered species list across North America, across the United States, we had over 50 breeding sites across the state. That is a 500% increase in bald eagle breeding areas in Arizona in 30 years. So in 3 decades, we had a 500% increase in birding areas. Now, this is just what's happening in Arizona. Obviously, a lot was happening around the nation to get the bald eagle completely delisted. Sites today continue to increase almost every year. Some of you may have seen this news that came out a few months ago. For the first time ever, biologists have documented bald eagles nesting in saguaros. They were known to nest in some other columnar cactus species in other parts of the world, basically. And we had an unsupported account of one nesting in a saguaro from years ago, but we didn't have any documentation of it. So we knew it was always a possibility that bald eagles could use saguaros, but this is the first year that we actually got evidence during one of our aerial nest flight surveys of bald eagles using a saguaro. So this was really cool news for us. It opens up the potential for other nesting sites in the future. As part of the management of bald eagles in the state, biologists spent a few years tracking the movement of eagles from Arizona. We were curious where they were going during their migration and how much they interacted with other eagles from around North America. Some of that study is ongoing, some of it's not necessarily available, but we have taken some of this data and made available for students to look at. And so what they're going to do is they can look at different maps of some of these tracked eagles, and they can compare and contrast, similar to what we did with the migration activity before. So here's some examples of some of the maps that are available. And these are just three birds. They have more that are available to you. See over the course of 2 years where these birds moved, and the idea is to start thinking about why are they moving to these locations, what are some similarities between their routes, and so on. There's questions that accompany these, but your kids can analyze these maps of actual bald eagle movements and try to get an idea of, when are they moving, why do you think they might be going to those different places like that. So let me see, we have Suzanne's pretty sure that they saw a juvenile bald eagle down near Pomeroy Tank. near Sunflower. Yeah, so if you look at actually along the Salton and the Verde rivers, most of the waterways in the lakes in central Arizona are going to have at least one nesting pair of bald eagles. Some of them we actually block off during certain times of year during the nesting season, or when the babies are being born. We'll block off parts of those waterways so that the public can't get near them, so that we don't disturb their nesting. Others are so remote that they don't necessarily need that. We also invoke volunteer nest watchers who sit near the nest, usually watching them with binoculars or telephoto lenses and things like that, and they are able to call in if there's any issues on the nest. So this is one of the management efforts we've been able to use. And as Ricky says, Verde is home to many eagles, and they have huge cottonwoods that make great homes. Absolutely. So there's all kinds of different aspects of eagles, especially, like I said, in that central Arizona corridor along the Salton and the Verde rivers. You're going to find lots of them. All right, so we're just about out of time. We have about 15 minutes left, and birds are a huge topic. This was just an overview. There is so much more we could have talked about birds. However, before we leave, I wanted to make sure that we give you a few more activity ideas of other ways that you can bring birds into the classroom. This is one of our newer ones that we've been promoting a little bit. We've incorporated this into some of our other webinars, but I did want to mention it here as well. In this case, students are able to create and use ethograms. If you're not familiar with ethograms are basically a data collection tool that allows you to study animal behavior. This is what zoologists use when they go in the field. You basically document all the different types of behaviors that you're seeing your particular study animal doing, whether it's feeding, preening, perching, walking, fighting, going to the bathroom, whatever it might be. You're documenting all this stuff. This gives us a good idea about how much time we can do time audits and stuff like that. How much time do different animals spend on different things? Well, you can do that. Your students can do that. It used to be common to do this at things like zoos, which was great. And I highly encourage you, if you're able to take a field trip to a zoo or even to a nature area where you have the opportunity to watch birds or any animal for an extended period of time, go ahead and do these types of activities. However, in the age of COVID and coronavirus, that's not always entirely possible. So we've been promoting this idea of using live streaming webcams to observe birds and other animals. Live streaming webcams have grown in popularity. The Arizona Game and Fish Department maintains a few of them. They are often seasonal because for example, we have live streaming webcams down in southern Arizona for the sandhill crane migrations. And so when the 30,000 or so sandhill cranes come into southern Arizona, we put cameras on those areas and you can watch the sandhill cranes. Well, right now the cranes aren't in Arizona, so those cameras are kind of shut down. You're not going to see a lot on there. We have a great horned owl nest cam that's pretty active right now, where we actually watch the development of two babies in that over the last few months. But we're not the only ones that have webcams. Lots of zoos have webcams and so on. So this is a great way for you to do this digitally, where you can assign these resources to your kids to do at home, where they can go on and they can observe at their own time, and they can share their learning, their data with the other students. You can start to culminate that into a larger thing. So this is an activity that we have that, again, you'll have access to it directly from the resources that are going to come at the end on how to make ethograms. I really enjoy allowing the students to make the ethograms so that they have some buy-in on what it is, or you could create the ethograms ahead of time, showing them the behaviors that they're looking for. But what I like to do is have them create the ethogram, observe and jot down every behavior that they notice, and then use that to create an ethogram. What are the behaviors you're looking for? And then go back and observe the animals again using their tool that they just created and start documenting the number of times they're seeing the animals do those different behaviors. If you are interested in using some of the department's webcams, but they're not up currently, I have been culminating some archives of some webcam footage as well, where I've just been filming the webcam off of my computer and putting that on YouTube. So that makes a good source as well. So if the kids can't go on and there's nothing live going on, you can send them to these links that have archived footage, and they can still do the same activities. It's just not quite as exciting because it's not live. There's not that unexpected nature. All of this, again, you're going to have access to. This is an example of some of the webcams, some screenshots that were captured from the webcams. The one on the right is our sandhill crane cam. You can see, again, not active right now because the cranes aren't here, but when they are active, these are the types of images that you get. And then the one on the left is our one from our great horned owl nest cam, and you can see that there are two babies that we actually followed to where you actually follow the growth and development of these babies. It was absolutely fascinating. I've been doing this in some of my other webinars. I think this is a really cool one. If you're not familiar, Douglas Florian is a popular poet who I got introduced to with that book that you see there in the lower right-hand corner called Encyclopedia. The idea being what he does is he writes poems about animals, and then he releases these books, and the books are pretty popular. He has a variety of ones. He has one including On the Wing, which is all about different bird species. His poems are fun. They're not super long. He does the artwork to accompany them, and they're usually humorous on some level. But what you could do is you can expose your kids to these types of poems, and then have your students write a poem about a bird of their choice in the style that Florian might do. I'm going to give you some examples of the poems that he does. So this is one called the Roadrunner. I picked ones that are related to Arizona. You can see the drawing on the right-hand side is the one that he created, and it accompanies his poem. The Roadrunner darts down dusty roads in search of insects, lizards and toads. Past tumbleweeds, it speeds for snakes, and catching them turns on the brakes. So you can see it's a fun little poem, but in the process, he is introducing some natural history. So we're learning a little bit about what the Roadrunner eats and how it hunts, a little bit just from this little poem. Here's another one called The Hummingbird. Barely bigger than your thumb, see it hover, hear it hum. With beating wings so fast they're blurred, this helicopter of a bird, which is a nice tie-in to the biomimicry lesson we were talking about at the beginning, because the hummingbird is often a model for helicopters, having the two independent rotors that are spinning, which allows the hummingbird to hover. The same thing with the helicopter usually has the upper rotor, and then the one on the back that spins and allows the helicopter to hover. And one final one here is on woodpeckers. Woodpeckers are peculiar things. They pick to peck, but not to sing. They rap and tap for sap in trees, till some they drum look like Swiss cheese. They thump on stumps of rotting wood to gobble insects. Tastes good. And so this is some examples, and Aletha just asked, what is the name of the poet? This is Douglas Florian. Let me go back real fast and I'll show you. Let me go back. Douglas Florian, you can see right there, is the name of the author of the poem. I'm sure if you can find his books on Amazon, you could probably order them from Barnes & Noble or your favorite bookstore. I don't know if he's still actively writing, but these are the ones that I picked up, and I've had these books for a number of years. They're great little books. They're not super long. They're maybe about 20, 30 pages, and each opening, so the artwork is on one page and the poem is on the other page. And so there's probably 15 or so poems in each book. So fun stuff. So that's one way to. I'm big on introducing literacy into the students. You saw with the reading activity I had before, the poetry one, and then this one is another one that I use at a lot of my workshops that I like to incorporate in. This is called 6-word memoir, and the idea is to really get the kids conciseness. How do they write concisely, but still get the main topics? So in this case, you ask the kids, this could be after you've been teaching about birds, they have to select a bird, and their job is to write a biography of the bird, write something about the bird. But the limit, of course, as you can probably figure out from the title, is that they can only do 6 words. No more, no less. They have to write 6 words about that bird, and that's all they can do. So to give you some examples, here are some birds. These are ones that teachers wrote in an earlier workshop that I did. This was on the wild turkey, and you can see this particular person chose to just write 6 individual things about the turkey: beard, spurs, poults, hens, jakes, and toms. So that was what they chose to write about the wild turkey. In a slightly different one, this person put it together more into sentences. So rather than just having 6 distinct pieces about turkeys, this person put it together more in a sentence and talking about the mockingbird. All night yodeling, mocking white flashes. So they incorporated into that one. And I think I have one more here, which is about the raven. And again, kind of some individual words here: opportunistic, solitary, omnivorous, patrolling, high-pitched. And so they incorporated, again, 6 words to describe the raven. So in this case, what I could see is handing the kids some fact sheets about animals, or they've done some research about animals, and then this could be the final assessment that you could give to the students. So just some more ideas to give to the kids. Hopefully, you have learned a little bit about birds and maybe even gained a greater appreciation of them through this webinar. If that is the case, I wanted to give you a few ways that you might be able to take action and help birds in a tangible way. First, as educators, you are in a unique position. You have the opportunity to reach many people with your actions. Accept this role and use it. Continue to learn, to educate yourself, but then spread the word. Tell people about the cool world of birds. Some other things that you can do, you can become a hero for wildlife. This is a new funding tool that the Arizona Game and Fish Department has been implementing. So if you're not a hunter and you're not an angler and you're not interested in buying a hunting or fishing license, but you still want to help animals in Arizona, and you recognize that the Arizona Game and Fish Department, because we are not a taxpayer-supported organization, we need funds to come in from other ways. So being a hero for wildlife, you can actually go on and you can sign up for a conservation membership. Those types of things come directly back to the department for the management of our non-game species, many of which are going to be birds. Another thing that's always important is disposing of waste properly. We've been talking about that for plastics and things like that. We mentioned before some of the species, some of the orders of birds that have 30% or more of their populations that were vulnerable. A lot of those were centered around water. So the proper disposal of plastics and making sure they don't get into the water. In Arizona, a direct piece of this is your fishing line. So if you are an angler and a lot of times you're fishing and the fishing line breaks and it gets piled up there on the shoreline, we're asking that you clean that stuff up, because a lot of that fishing line is very, very common for it to get into the nests of bald eagles in particular. They grab it for some of their nesting material. They don't realize, and what happens is because it doesn't break very easily, it wraps around. We've had cases of the fishing line getting wrapped around the babies and in some cases suffocating them or killing them. So proper waste disposal. Volunteering for organizations. Find organizations that help birds. Things like Liberty Wildlife or those types of places, if you have the ability and you want to actually work with rehabilitated birds, but also getting organizations that work with habitat improvements on different types of things. And then, of course, recreating positively, in going out to these places where birding is such a huge boon for many of the local economies. And so if we can continue to make ecotourism and that idea important for these communities, they are more likely to make sure that the birds play a bigger role into their economy, and they want to preserve them and conserve them. So recreating and going to these locations, participating in bird watching, participating in hiking, taking photographs, sharing those things on Facebook, to the extent necessary, showing that birds are cool as part of the recreation. These are all important things that make a difference. With that, I would like to thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat or the Q&A boxes. There are some questions that came through and I'm going to address them. But while I wait for additional questions, I'm going to talk about some of the upcoming workshops and next steps. So this is a very quick sales pitch. If you need to run, I totally understand. You should receive an email shortly with your link to the certificate. But let's go ahead and talk about some of this. First of all, there's the link for the bird resources. Don't worry about writing it down right now. It is going to come in that follow-up email that you're going to get within about an hour or so. If you want to, I highly encourage you to stay in touch with us. We are constantly adding workshops. And I have a tendency, I don't like to, just because you sign up for this workshop doesn't mean I'm adding you to any particular mailing list. I might send you one or two follow-up emails, just say, hey, just so you know, we just launched a workshop that you might be interested in. But I tend not to do that too much. I leave it kind of up to you. If you enjoyed this workshop, I highly encourage you to be proactive and find out more about us. We do have a Focus Wild Facebook page where we post information about upcoming workshops and resources that are available. You can also sign up for our Educator newsletter through the department's main e-newsletter sign-up piece. I do have a couple more webinars that I've been launching. This was supposed to be the last of my Wildlife Wednesday ones, but I kind of felt bad that I was leaving reptiles out of the mix, so I decided to add one more. So next Wednesday, we'll be talking about reptiles. By the way, all of these have been recorded. I'm in the process of editing them down a little bit, taking out things like that horrible coughing fit that I had at the beginning of this webinar. I edit those types of things out, and then they're going to get added to the website. So if you missed one of the earlier ones, that'll be in there probably in the next month or two. You can register for those. You can see there's two different links down there. But we're also starting a series called Learning from Home Resources and Opportunities, recognizing that many of you are starting to gear up now for what the school year is going to look like next year. And understanding that learning from home is probably going to be a piece of that, whether you actually homeschool or whether you have students that are going to be at home and you're looking for resources that they can do, or you're looking for those opportunities where the students are there, but they were sick on a particular day. And rather than having to recreate an entire lab, maybe you're looking for other things they can do. So we're going to be sharing with you over the 3 weeks in July some of the learning from home resources or things you can do with students. The first one is going to be our learning from home resources. So we put together a website. We're going to be highlighting some of those. And then we're going to be talking about other things that you can do. One of those is using live webcams to study animal behavior, which we talked about. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on that. And then we're going to be talking about citizen science and how you can use digital resources such as iNaturalist with your students at home. So those are some upcoming webinars. Again, they're all free. You can sign up for them at either of those two sites that are there. You'll get more information in the email as well. With that, I'm going to go through and look for any questions that have come through. Feel free to reach out. There's my email address. That email is the best way. As you can imagine, I'm still working from home, as are many people. So email is the best way to get in touch with me, but there are some websites as well. I want to thank you for coming out. I'm going to probably mute my microphone briefly while I look through the questions that are coming through. I'm going to try to get to all of them. If for some reason I miss you, I apologize. You can always email me later. If you're done and you don't have any questions, you don't want to hear the answers to them, feel free to leave. That's all that I have for you. And look at that. I got it done right in an hour, which is great. Again, I'm going to mute this for just a minute while I look at the questions that are coming through. Okay, so Alyssa for Alyssa, you're talking about the Arizona Geographical Alliance. Absolutely, feel free to use whatever. I would just ask that maybe if you remember, send me any of the stuff that you might use from us. Not necessarily because I care that it gets out there, because our stuff, I want it to get out there, but more because I want to maybe help promote it as well. If it's wildlife related, I've worked with the Geographic Alliance for a long time. I've presented at some of their conferences in the past. I have a lot of respect for that organization. I really like it. If there's good wildlife focused activities, I would love to be able to promote them in our materials as well. So if you do some of that stuff, feel free to just reach out and say, hey, just so you know, I put this together, or here's some stuff. I'd love to promote them as well, even if they just have a slight wildlife touch in. So absolutely use them as you see fit. Ricky talks about how she's been talking about she teaches STEM and STEAM, and these fit in there really well. Ricky, if you want more stuff on the California condor, let me know. I actually did a webinar a few months ago on vultures, and the condor was included in that. So I can send you the information on that as well. Susan asked for past PD certificates. I have your email. I've just been on vacation for a little bit, Susan. I'll make sure I get those to you when I see your email. Suzanne writes, you could also have the 6 words for students unconnected to the birds' pictures, and then have students match up the 6 words to the pictures. What a great critical thinking activity as well. So you could have pictures and then the 6 words that are separate, and then the kids have to match them together. So what these 6 words are describing which of these animals. Great idea. Robert, I'll make sure I get you your mammal and fish certificates. I'm going through some old emails. Like I said, I've been on vacation for a little bit. So I'll make sure I get those out to you as well. Other than that, those are those questions. Looks like, oh, okay. So Anne, can you show the slide with the recommended books one more time? I think you're talking about the, I'm looking for the title of the book with the bat. Are you talking about the poetry books? Let me go back. So here's the poetry one. Let me go back one more, and there you can see. If you search Douglas Florine, you should see the collection of his books. So he has one, obviously, Encyclopedia is just about insects. He has On the Wing, which is about birds. He has one called In the Swim, which is about fish and other aquatic animals. He has Mammalilia, which is about mammals. And then these other two, Zoos, Who's, and Beast Feast, are a little bit more general. So they're not about any particular grouping of animals. They're about these other ones. So if you search Douglas Florine, all of these different, and I think there's one in here. I think there's one more on pets, like more like pet animals. But yeah, so there's different ones. The bats actually appear in a couple different ones. They appear in Beast Feast, and I think he has another one in his mammal one as well. So you can actually see a couple different bat ones. So good. All right, I think that looks like most of the questions that are here. And Robert's asking when I worked at the zoo. So everybody doesn't need to hear this. So obviously, if you're done, you're done. I was actually a zoo teen. That's how I got started with the Phoenix Zoo. So that would have been in the early 90s. And then I left and went to college and all that stuff. And then I was at the zoo as an outreach instructor while I was still teaching. So that would have been after you. That would have been probably at the earliest, it would have been 99. But obviously some of the people I know, you probably knew, people like Mike Foley and people like that. So I was there. I was only there for a short time. I worked there for a summer, and a little bit into the school year, I was doing it as extra income while I was teaching. Good. All right. Well, I'm going to stick on for just a few more minutes to see if there's any last minute questions that come through. Otherwise, feel free to log out whenever you want to, guys. Thank you.